Jason Todd, you have been found guilty of stealing other people's identities, of not living up to the expectations of fans and creators, of disgracing the mantle of the boy wonder. For all these, you are hereby sentenced to die.
Hello again, Bat fans! The time has come to take a look at one of the most famous Batman stories of all time, A Death in the Family. I'm quite sure most of us have at least heard about that story and why it is important. But what if I told you that there are many secrets about that story and the reason why it actually happened? In this episode, we are going to expose the truth about Jason Todd's death. For this reason, we can't take much time explaining the story, so instead we're just gonna make a quick recap, as I'm sure most of us here know the story very well. It all begins with Jason acting reckless in dangerous situations, as usual, and as a result, Batman decides to take Jason off duty as his partner. The boy goes to his old home in Crime Alley, where he finds some old stuff from his parents. Among the pictures and memories, Jason finds his birth certificate and learns that his mother was not who he thought it was. And so Jason begins his quest to find his real mother, which takes him to the Middle East of all places. In the meantime, the Joker has escaped from Arkham and he also travels to the Middle East to sell a nuclear weapon to terrorists. Batman follows the Joker and is reunited with Jason, and so they start working together to stop the Joker and find Jason's mother. Their quest leads them to Africa, where Jason is finally reunited with his real mother. Unfortunately, she was being blackmailed by the Joker, and the Madman's plan forced Batman and Robin to get separated. Batman goes to stop Joker's henchmen and Robin tries to save his mother from the Joker. It is then that she betrays him and Joker gets the chance to brutally beat Robin with a crowbar before leaving him and his mother inside a warehouse with a bomb. Batman can't save them, and both mother and son are killed in the explosion. Robin is dead and Batman makes all the arrangements for the funeral back in Gotham. After this, he starts planning his revenge against the Joker, but he soon learns that he can't do anything because the Joker has become ambassador for Iran, giving him diplomatic immunity. The Joker then tries to kill everyone at the United Nations building, but thankfully Superman shows up to save the day. Batman then tries to stop the Joker, but the Madman is apparently killed when his getaway helicopter crashes and explodes. However, Batman knows that the Joker doesn't die so easily, but he still regrets that they can never resolve their conflict. The most important thing of this story is not the death of Robin, but the fact that DC allowed fans to make that decision. DC set up 2 phone numbers where fans could call to vote for Jason to live or die. Since then, that has been the official story, that the fans killed Jason. But I have to ask, is that really what happened? That has been what DC has told everyone since the story happened. But what evidence do we have about the voting system? The only thing we have is DC's word about it. It's really hard to believe that the fans were in charge, when at the end of the day, the people responsible for actually writing, drawing, editing and printing the death of Jason were not the fans. It was DC who actually killed Robin. It's very obvious when you think about it. The story consisted of a series of extremely convenient events. See, for example, Joker had an unknown military friend who gave him the nuclear weapon. Of course. Jason finds a long-lost birth certificate and travels to find his mother to the exact same places where the Joker is. Of course. Joker then blackmails Jason's mother of all people, and she turns out to be a crook, causing the fatal outcome for Jason. Of course. And finally, to top it all, Joker becomes ambassador and gets diplomatic immunity. I'm sorry, but that's just too much to ask me to believe. The Joker, a criminally insane man who doesn't even have a legal name, becomes an international ambassador? What kind of asinine plot is that? Well, it's a plot that had only one purpose: to get Jason out of the picture. Someone will die. That was the phrase in the several ads promoting this storyline, which makes me think that they didn't intend to let Jason live. DC needed to kill Jason, but to get away with it, they came up with this idea of letting the fans decide. But the question is, did they really had a choice? DC set up these two numbers, which, by the way, the one to kill Jason ended in 666. Can you really be more cheesy about it? And after the lines went down, it was DC who counted the votes. How convenient! My point is, DC wanted to eliminate Robin, no matter what, and this stunt gave them the perfect alibi. It was more convenient to blame the fans than actually admitting that they wanted to kill Robin. But how do we know that they wanted to get rid of Robin? It's rather easy. All we have to do is take a look at the real killers. The first killer is writer Jim Starlin. It is no secret that he didn't like Robin. It is evident in the comics he wrote, as well as his many interviews. In the comics, he avoided using Robin, and when he did use him, Jason was intentionally misused, ignored, or straight up awful. Starling wanted Jason dead from the very beginning of his run in Batman, and so he wrote stories to make Jason unlikable to the audience, preparing the fans to vote against Jason. And that's how Starling got what he wanted. But now we have to ask, why did DC allow him to kill Robin? The answer is in the second killer, editor Dennis O'Neil. Starling has said in interviews that O'Neil came up with the phone experiment to give him the chance to get rid of Jason. In other words, O'Neil allowed Starling to kill the Boy Wonder. And again, we have to ask why? Why would O'Neil do that? That one is a bit tricky. We have to rewind a few years back to the time when Dennis O'Neil was writing Batman. Back then, O'Neil was best known for returning Batman to his dark origins, writing the stories of the Dark Avenger of the Night. Those stories redefined Batman for how good they were, but most importantly, Dennis O'Neil didn't have to use Robin in those stories. Back in the Bronze Age, Dick Grayson moved away from Wayne Manor to go to college. That was an editorial decision, and it allowed O'Neil to write solo Batman stories. In fact, most of the great Batman stories by Dennis O'Neil don't have Robin in them. It's obvious that O'Neil didn't like Robin. He didn't care if it was Dick Grayson or Jason Todd. He just didn't care about Robin as a character. In various interviews, he often refers to Dick Grayson or Jason Todd as little snots. And soon after he became editor, he arranged for Detective Comics to become a solo Batman book, leaving Robin out of the picture just months before killing him. So, if the editor didn't care about Robin, and the writer wanted to kill him, it's easy to see how it all happened. O'Neil and Starlin were in cahoots to get rid of Jason, and they succeeded. I would even go as far as to say that they never considered allowing Jason to live if it wasn't for that one page by Jim Aparo where Batman finds Robin alive. Although that evidence is quite convincing, it's not as good as having all the pages that would have changed had Jason survived. Where are those pages? Why haven't they been officially released as this one page? Could it be that the art was actually done after the stunt backfired and every major news outlet in the country started talking about the death of Robin? It all seems very convenient. The official story of the phone calls was revealed by Dennis O'Neil in the letter pages of the Batman comics, where he explained how the fans who wanted Jason dead outnumbered the ones who wanted him alive by 72 votes. The whole story is very dramatic, and the reason why I don't buy it is because O'Neil is a professional writer. His job is to come up with the stories, make them up. Wouldn't it be ironic if this was the best story he ever came up with? Just something to think about. Anyway, the deed was done and Robin was gone. However, instead of having a really broken Batman, Starling wrote him as stoic as ever, which goes back to the fact that he didn't care about Jason. When Starling wrote a conversation with Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne, the emotions were hard and extreme. Now Jason dies and Bruce doesn't even stop to grieve a little. Nothing. In the end, all that mattered is that Robin was no more, and even if he survived, he was not going to be Robin anymore. The whole point of a death in the family was to get rid of Jason. It is even foreshadowed in the story, when Bruce wonders if after finding his mother, Jason would continue as Robin. Let's assume Robin survived the explosion. What then? The Joker did extensive damage with a crowbar. The recovery wouldn't have been easy or successful at all. Starling and O'Neil would have found a way to keep Jason out of action. Maybe he was left in a permanent coma. Maybe he was crippled, like Barbara. Maybe Bruce would outright reject him and forbid him from being Robin anymore, as he was less than ideal for the job. Countless possibilities, all leading to one outcome. Jason wouldn't be Robin anymore. That was the whole point of this story. Whether he lived or died didn't really matter in the end. DC was officially planning to retire Jason as the Boy Wonder. Now the question is, why would DC want to get rid of Robin now? Where did they come up with the idea in the first place? Well, that one is a bit easier. The first time the idea of a dead Jason Todd was used was in The Dark Knight Returns. So really the first person to kill Jason was Frank Miller. And because The Dark Knight Returns was so successful and everyone loved it, I'm sure Starling and O'Neill thought everyone would approve of using the same idea in the actual continuity. And that wasn't even the only idea they took from The Dark Knight Returns. By the end of A Death in the Family, Starling has Superman confronting Batman under the request of the US government. How original. So now you see why I never like when people use ideas from that story. It never ends up being something good. Now, the other lingering question that remains is, why of all villains was the Joker chosen to kill Robin? Why not Two-Face? Since this was Jason and Two-Face killed his father, it would have been more dramatic to have Two-Face threaten his mother and kill Robin. Or why not Ra's al Ghul? Since most of the story takes place in the Middle East and Africa, it would have made much more sense if Robin was killed by the League of Assassins. But they decided to go with the Joker. The question is, why? And there are actually two answers for this. The first one is that the Joker already did something terrible. The Killing Joke was released only a few months back and most people like that story, despite the fact that Joker crippled Barbara, taking Batgirl out of action. DC got away with it without much trouble, and so they must have thought it was a good idea to repeat the formula. But the second and most important reason for using the Joker in such a big story was because of the upcoming Batman movie. That's right. The Killing Joke and A Death in the Family are a consequence of the 1989 Batman movie. When you think about it, it all makes perfect sense. The main villain of that movie was going to be the Joker, and the comics needed to put him back on the spotlight. So what better way to do it than making him responsible for the two biggest crimes against Batman? And in doing so, the comics also started to get a very dark tone, very similar to the one from the movie. You see, Dennis O'Neill was worried that the comics wouldn't match the feeling of the Batman movie, and so he started changing the comics to make them match what the people were going to see in that blockbuster. He made the Joker a more serious threat, and he eliminated the sidekicks. The movie was going to feature Batman without any partners, and in order to capitalize on that idea, they decided to get rid of Batgirl and Robin in the comics. And that's the problem with comics. They always feel like they need to align and match with whatever is popular on the TV and the movies. It has always been like that, and it will never change. Now, we've made it to the last part of the video, and it's time to talk seriously. Taking away all the crazy conspiracy theories and the reasons why DC killed Jason, I feel like that was something inevitable. It would have happened sooner or later, and the reason why I say that is because Jason Todd was doomed from the very beginning. Allow me to explain. The idea of killing Robin was always something interesting. Creators played with the concept starting in the Golden Age, where Robin almost died a couple of times, and one of those at the hands of the Joker. Years later, in the Silver Age, creators came up with this story called Robin Dies at Dawn. The imagery of Batman carrying the dead body of Robin was always very appealing. Probably because of shock value and also because it gives writers all sorts of possibilities to write stories around that idea. But back then, that's all it was. An idea to get people's attention. Nothing serious. All that changed when Jason was introduced. Jason was created in the Bronze Age because Dick Grayson was about to become Nightwing, and the Batman creators needed a new Robin. Jerry Conway came up with Jason Todd, but the problem is that he made him a cheap copy of Dick Grayson, giving him almost the exact same background and origin story. And to make things worse, Conway ended his run in Batman right after he created Jason. So the only writer who was familiar with this new character and who cared about him had to leave the books and allow others to develop Jason. That was the second problem in the history of the character. Nobody was familiar or cared about the new Robin. The fans wanted Dick Grayson as Robin, and the creators had no idea what to do with Jason. After Conway, Doug Moench was the first writer to develop Jason until the end of the Bronze Age. He did his best to give life to Jason, but even he couldn't elevate the character and make him outstanding. It was obvious that people were not happy with a different Robin, and DC tried to make him as similar as possible to the original, but the copy was never good enough. During the 3-year run of Doug Moench, the image of Batman carrying a dead Robin was used once or twice in a row, more than it was ever used with Dick Grayson. However, by the end of Moench's run, Jason was a good Robin and he was slowly growing into the fandom. Unfortunately, new writers came along. All of them were more familiar with Dick Grayson. They didn't grow up with Jason, and so they didn't really care for this unknown sidekick. Frank Miller was the first, and in his futuristic version of Batman, Jason Todd was dead. That's how much he cared about Jason. Mike Barr came later, and although he used Robin consistently, he also used that imagery of the dead Robin in his stories, and even foreshadowed Jason's death at the hands of a criminal. So you see how the idea of killing Jason was part of every writer's mind. The only writer who didn't want to kill Jason was Max Allan Collins, but that was mostly because he was hired to create a new origin for Jason, and he did. But he also gave Jason a difficult personality. He made him strong, stubborn, and reckless. It's almost as if Max Allan Collins also didn't like Robin. And the personality that he gave him was not ideal, because when Jim Starlin came along, he used all those personality traits to make Jason an awful character and straight up kill him, doing what most of his peers wanted to do all along. And that, my friends, is why Jason Todd was doomed to die anyway. Fortunately, nobody stays dead in comics, and Jason returned many years later as Red Hood, and someday we will talk about him, but for now, this is the end. The second Robin is gone and the history of Batman continues in the next episode, where we will check out the aftermath of a death in the family. If you enjoyed this special video, leave a like and let me know what you think of the whole death in the family situation. Also subscribe and come back for the next episode. Until then, Godspeed, my friends.